Well, hello everybody, and welcome to Be a Bestseller 6.0 Back to Basics. And the purpose of this series is to take you back to those foundational skills of storytelling giving you a solid base upon which to base your craft and, of course, finish your book. And today's guest is Jeff Lyons. Jeff is the author of Anatomy of a Premise Line, How to Master Premise and Story Development for Writing Success, and Rapid Story Development, How to Use the Enneagram-Story Connection to Become a Master Storyteller. And they're both published through Focal Press. Jeff's writing has also appeared in Writer's Digest magazine, Script magazine, The Writer magazine, and Writing magazine here in the UK. His theatrical feature film, American Thunderbolt, will be released in 2025 through Content Kings Film here in the UK again. And he has several TV series currently in active development in the US and both in the UK too. Jeff is the founder of Storygeeks.com. And today we're going to talk about what is story development. So, Jeff, thank you for coming in. I can't wait to chat to you about all of these things.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So, first of all, congratulations on your film that's coming out. So, I feel we ought to give a little sort of plug to that,
Oh
if
my gosh.
possible.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's welcome to the movie business. It's taken me 19 years to get that thing made. I wrote it in 2005, and
Wow.
it's just so hard to get a movie made. And the business right now is very tough. It's going through this very crazy, scary contraction business wise.
Hmm. Hmm.
So to have a project actively engaged like this is like wow. It's like my lottery ticket got hit by lightning.
Well,
And
double congratulations.
and Content Kings Films, which is in London, I've been working with them for several years now on different projects I've got. So just a shout out to them. They're the best. They've got a TV division and television division. Great people. But this is a boxing movie set in 1925 in Minneapolis, Minnesota, based on the life of a real live boxer, Billy Miskey. It's basically Rocky set in 1925. It's a love story boxing movie. Uh,
Oh,
but based on a real person, and it's I'm very proud of it. I think it'll be a nice offering and
yeah.
a great date movie.
Oh, cool. Well, yeah. So if we kind of think about, novel writing particularly, we think of that quite often, writing our first novel, particularly. A lot of people say that takes a long time. It's taken me 7 years to write this book, but here we go. We're having an example of how in other industries it can be even longer and even harder. And from your bio, we can clearly see you've dipped your hand into a few different storytelling formats. So I feel like that's a good place to start is, how did you get into novel writing or storytelling, I should say?
Well, storytelling, yeah, because when we get into what story development is, I can explain that a little bit better. But um, I'm primarily a screenwriter. That's how my brain works. I find novel writers and just book writers in general to be amazing animals because it's a whole different ballgame. It's not just a long screenplay, a book. There's it's a whole sensibility that's different between novels and screenwriting. That's very hard to master. And I'm making that transition myself. I've got some short fiction up on my novellas that I've written. I do like weird tales, Twilight Zone kind of stuff. And I've got those up on my Amazon page, Jeff Lyons on Amazon.com. And I really enjoy long form prose, but it's really a challenge for me and it's hard. But it's a transition that I think all writers need. The days of saying I'm just a this or I'm a that writer are gone. If you want to be a professional writer, if you want to make a living as a storyteller, you have to have your fingers in lots of different pies.
Mhm.
You've got to be in TV, you've got to be in film, you've got to be in novels, you've got to be in creative nonfiction, you've got to be all over the place with your stuff. And um, the more the better. If you just pick one little niche, it's one little niche. And in the market today, every novelist I know is struggling. Even I have a friend who's a best-selling, New York Times best-selling writer. She struggles,
Mhm.
and royalties have been cut, 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 cut. You're lucky to make 10 grand on an advance deal,
Yeah.
Good luck raising a family on that, right? So
Well, it's
it's
interesting you say that because I have noticed, two of my favorite authors, well, one in particular, Harlan Coben, who writes thriller, I've noticed that he's sort of branched out into his Netflix deals and he's doing a lot involved with
yes,
that. So
they're all
he's
yes,
into,
everybody's doing that.
and he's also teaching in one of these sort of subscription masterclass series. So I've noticed a lot of authors
Yeah,
are, and those who are at the top of their game are still
yeah.
kind of reaching out. And I've always assumed, perhaps wrongly, that that's because they're wanting a new challenge. It's something new that they can do, but perhaps there is that financial element to it as well.
It's a cash cow, and it's fun. I mean, I teach, I teach at Stanford University, and I teach online, and I love teaching. It's just I love the one-on-one. I love working with writers directly. But this is where we get into the story development thing because I'm not a creative writing guy. I mean, I'm a good writer. I think I'm a very good writer, but I'm a really, really good story guy.
Mhm.
And the problem is most writers think storytelling and writing are the same thing, and they're not. They're completely different things, and they literally have nothing to do with one another. And that
Why do you
always,
think they've got nothing to do with each other?
well, think about it logically. Human beings have been telling stories for 40 to 60,000 years. How old is written language? Maybe 6, 7,000 years.
Yeah.
So what have we been doing in the interim? How have we been telling those stories? We've been dancing those stories. We've been singing those stories. We've been drawing those stories. You don't have to be anywhere near a piece of paper and a pencil to tell a story. That's just the delivery system.
Mhm.
Okay. Now, writing is its own thing. And I talk about this in Anatomy of a Premise Line. I explain the difference between storytelling and writing. And the problem in the creative writing, what I call the creative writing cult, is all these memes about you got to do this and you got to do that. And, writers write. So just write. Don't censor. Don't stop yourself. Don't get into the worst advice on the planet for beginning writers. Um, I just lost my train of thought.
Well, let's put it, let's start with giving the advice then. So, how would you that connection between, say, filmmaking
Thank
and
you. Thank
novel, how do we kind of make those stories? And so I know that novelists often turn to screenplay books about how to tell story and looking for structure in their story. And so, I mean, is that something that as
That's
novelists
why
you
that's why
do?
it's so difficult because there's the story development world, the story guru world is a very crowded one right now and very loud. There's lots of competing voices. A lot of them are screenwriters who are trying to, like these big authors are getting into teaching and so on. They're writing books and they're getting into here's how you adapt a screenplay to a novel, blah, blah, blah. And they've got their proprietary systems. Here's, all, and I'm guilty of this too. I've got my own proprietary stuff that I sell. I've got to pay the rent. But the bottom line is you're going to have to kiss a lot of frogs, to find your prince. And my
You mean
motto
in
is
terms of that you've got to write a lot of stories to find
no,
your
you've got
voice
in
in
terms
there?
of looking for tools, looking for things that will help you develop your storytelling skills. My approach is story first, writing second.
Okay.
Get from idea to pages first, and that can take you many months to break your story out and to figure it out and then start pages after and I firmly believe now after years of doing this there is a methodology and I teach it and I have a premise line that you can validate any story idea in 20 minutes to find out whether it's got some meat on the bones.
Hmm.
You got a new idea for a book and you say to yourself, oh, I'm going to spend the next 2 years of my life writing this book. Really? Really? How? Why? how many good ideas how many great ideas do you think you come up with in a month? How do you make the decision to go here and not there? It's because it's a part of you that senses the story structure that's already there. And I'm a big story structure guy. Novelists, this is the weakest part of the game for novelists. MFA programs don't teach this. A lot of creative writing classes don't teach this. How do you approach developing a story structurally? And this is what you've got to learn. This is what I teach, is story development.
So
Okay.
what would be a sort of starting point then for someone who is looking to learn more about structure?
Figure out whether you've got a story versus a situation. Okay. The story is a human being. Now, as bland, as simplistic as this sounds, a story now in this current age of writing is an adventure where a human being is on a journey of change, where they're different at the end than they are at the beginning, and they resolve an internal problem of some kind. That's a story. Oh
Yeah.
my God, how cookie cutter is that? Yes, it is, because stories are cookie cutter. How many love stories have we ever seen? Thousands are written every year, but some lift up above the rest. Why? Because they've got the originality, they've got the uniqueness, they've got an original take, and they've got solid storytelling elements to it, which means you've got a very clear structure: inciting incident, midpoint complication, doom moment, final battle, resolution, blah, blah, blah. You've heard them a million times, you've seen them a million times, you've read them a million times. But all these basic principles get lost in this story structure zoo that's out there with people selling you stuff. So
So
that's what I'm saying. You got to keep finding the resources that will teach you this skill set particularly, and that just takes time.
yay. So it sounds like what you're saying is just your bog standard solid 3 act structure with those key points in it, with your inciting incident, your midpoint turn, and then carry on with the rising action.
There's
That is that.
there's basically the classic structure, which is about 5 basic beats, but it's more complicated than that. There is when you have a story that's got a person on a journey of change, it's fueled by this thing I call the moral component, the moral problem. Oh, you got to have a character with a flaw. They've got to have, but nobody ever tells you how to bloody get one. How do you find the darn thing? Okay,
That's the bit that takes time.
that takes time, that takes analysis, that takes understanding how character and plot are the same thing. They're not separate things.
Yeah.
And you must have that moral component because that's the driver of the middle of every story. That's what helps you avoid the mushy middle.
Okay. Okay.
Okay.
So I
If
think we're
if you if,
establishing.
if you if you don't have that story, you've still got something. It's called a situation, which is all about the puzzle, the mystery, the fun, the entertainment. No one's going to change. No one's going to have a revelation about what happened when they were 5 and that changed their life. No, it's just how fast can I run? How entertaining is the story? This is a 20-something kids caught in the cabin in the woods and the monsters outside going to eat them. No big revelations. It's who's going to get out alive? How bloody is it going to get? That's a situation. Agatha Christie, all situations. She doesn't write stories. She writes situations. And they're wonderful. Everybody loves them. Jessica Fletcher and Murder, She Wrote, all the cozy mysteries. Those are all situational,
Mhm,
not
mhm.
bad, not wrong, but not stories. And you write them differently. So you've got
Okay.
what I call a conscious writer. Know what you're writing, know why you're writing it, know how you're going to do it. You must understand story development in order to be able to answer these questions. Otherwise, you're throwing it yourself in the wind,
Yeah.
crossing your
So
fingers and toes.
so structure then for you definitely is, it's like the foundation for everything. If you're going to write a
Foundation
story,
for
you
everything.
need to have your structure.
Well, you need a structure for situations too, but with a story, you've got to have a moral element. The character's got to have a fundamental flaw in them that is driving and motivating everything they do in
Mhm.
scenes.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
and that's hard to do.
It's
And I think
very hard to do.
particularly for newer authors who are still grappling just with the plot line and putting a plot line together.
Exactly. Exactly. It's
Yeah.
hard. It's hard enough when you've got a massive 3-volume fantasy series with magic systems and all this stuff going on and trying to come up with a problem. What's Katniss Everdeen's problem? You know,
Yeah.
what's, your character has to want something for
Mhm.
the book, for the first book. There's got to be a clear desire line, and for the series. That's a whole other thing I talk about with a lot of writers
Mhm.
now is writing series versus writing one-off books.
Yeah. Let's not go down that rabbit hole.
Let's not go down that rabbit hole, no. But
But
the
it's great to hear you say
fundamental
that
thing
because that's
here,
certainly something that with my clients, that's what we focus on, very much looking at that flaw. What is it the character is trying to say about life within this? How are they going to change over the course of the book? So,
let me digress to that real quick. So what most people do is they go, oh, well, they have to learn how to love. They have to learn how to be a loving person. That's their problem. Okay.
mhm,
And that's where most people stop.
mhm.
I ask writers to go one level down. Well, why can't they do that? Ask the question why. They
Mhm.
have to learn how to trust. They have to learn how to be trusting people. Well, why? Why don't they trust? What is broken in them that they can't trust? What does that even mean? And when you go just that one level down, you totally change the game.
You do, you do. It's a question I ask a lot and is
Good,
asked
good
of
for
me,
you.
of my coach, and my clients find it frustrating and I find it frustrating. But if we do it, if we answer the question, and you're right, it just releases so much.
And my process gets you there. It asks very targeted questions to help you figure that out.
Yeah, yeah, it's vital. So okay,
Vital.
so got to understand the basic structure. We need to have that flow as well, and understanding that character arc that someone is going to go through this story. So you're as aware as I am then that there is a perceived camp of people that either they plot their novel or they pants their novel. So do you feel that one of I think I know the answer, but do you feel that one of these would be better than the other in terms of trying to get that story on the page?
This is one of those creative writing cult things that just drives me up a wall. Pantsers versus plotters. It's a false argument. It's just one of these crazy memes. There's no such thing as either or. We do both of them. We have to do both of them. Screenwriters have to tell more than show because of the nature of the medium. Exposition is your enemy. For long form prose writers, exposition is your friend. You can still get lost in the story woods with all the explanations but exp, plotting versus pantsing is a false dichotomy because you're going to have to do both writing a novel. Okay. But what I maintain for most writers who don't have the story, what I call the story gene, the more you can, Stephen King doesn't think about any of this stuff. He just writes. He just, because he knows where not to go intuitively, right? A lot of
Mhm.
writers are like that. Well, not a lot, but the really successful ones that really have that natural ability. If you will discipline yourself and learn the craft of storytelling from a story structure perspective, the pantsing takes care of itself. There's that moment where the automatic writing kind of happens and the stories quote tell themselves, the characters write themselves. They don't. You're the writer, you write it all. If you don't write, nothing will happen. But it feels that way because your process is so beautifully integrated. But for most writers, it's the story piece that's missing. And if you get that going and solid, the pantsing part will be the payoff. That'll be the creative fun part that you feel. Um, don't get locked in on outlining is bad, blah blah blah. The biggest problem with the outlining argument is that, oh, it kills creativity. Just the opposite is true. Creative writing is a reductive process. It's,
Expand.
it's about eliminating creative choices. If you don't make creative choice, you'll never get anything written. You must make decisions. Well, the trick is knowing which decisions are going to be the most optimal for your story. That means you have to understand structure. You have to understand that moral problem. You have to understand how scenes are created. You have to understand the craft of how the story's told. That's what helps you validate that.
Mhm.
You must you've got to make choices. But what happens when you do, and you're in the right structure groove of the story you've got, because every story has a structure, whether you like it or not.
Mhm.
When you find it, you're on your way. And that's when you begin, that's when more creativity comes. And it's relevant creativity. It's not just you grasping at straws. It's ideas that the story math. You make a decision. You've got to pay it off. Then what happens next? That's all what I call story math.
Mhm.
Chekhov's rifle. Don't put a loaded rifle on the stage unless it's going to go off by the end of the play. It's just you set something up, you better deliver it to the reader. They're going to be really pissed off if you don't.
Mhm.
Story
Mhm.
math. But when you're in your structure, you've got it down, it comes and all these new possibilities open up that are relevant to what you're trying to do. So creativity actually is helped by this process.
So if we're thinking about our kind of debut or certainly newer authors who are doing their first few books, and like, I do describe myself as a pantser or a discovery writer if I'm feeling posh. Um, but but do you think it's possible then to still be able to write that book just going by the seat of your pants and then put the structure in later while as in while in revision?
Well, that's how most people do it. That's how most people do it. And that's basically NaNoWriMo. Okay, National Novel Writing Month. Okay. Um, just right. Just pants it, go for it. And I'm not judging you. I'm not judging anyone who does that. It's a choice. Okay. Be the conscious writer. Know the choice you're making. Know every creative choice you make has creative consequences. If you know what those are and you can live with that, go for it, knock yourself out, have a great time. Okay.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
again, if you will just learn the skill sets, you can do both. It's not about having to make a choice.
hmm,
It's just not having to, but a beginning writer takes that and they do what I call backing into the story. They end up with their 50,000 words.
yeah,
And then now you've got to go back and figure out where do the wheels come off the cart.
yeah,
You've just made your life twice as hard because now you've got to go through all that stuff to find the gems.
yeah,
Figure it out and then write. You can always go back again. You'll always do that. You're always going back and forth, but you will literally cut your development time in half if you just develop the skill set.
yeah.
If you pants it and just bleh, throw it out, get it on the page, you're throwing an obstacle in your way. Again, not bad and wrong. Just know the consequences. Now you're going to have to back into your story. You're going to have to figure it out the hard way.
Yeah, that has certainly been my experience, Jeff. I
Yeah, that's how
I
most people do
love
it.
that process of just going for it and seeing what happens and where the story comes. But I have learned, and I have to acknowledge that this is the way I work. I then have a lot of work to do on the back end
There
to
you go.
into
See,
shape. Yeah,
you're being a conscious writer. You know what you're doing, why you're doing it, and how you want to do it.
yeah,
Fine.
yeah.
Not bad, not
Okay,
wrong.
good.
Just you're just you're a thing, you know?
So you mentioned sort of earlier on the idea that storytelling and writing are not the same thing, and I was curious if you could maybe just expand on that a little bit because I think for most of us listening, we'll be thinking, well, they are the same because we're writing a story and we're telling a story through words. So I wonder if you would just kind of expand on that for us.
Because you don't have to have written language to tell a story. There are cave paintings in France, 40,000 years old that tell stories. You
So
simply
then, if they're not the same thing, then should we be thinking about writing a story in a different way to if we were orally telling a story or doing with those cave paintings?
well, that's a great question. And this is the fundamental idea about how I work with people is that story. It doesn't matter the form. It doesn't matter whether you're writing a 30-second TV commercial. It doesn't matter whether you're writing a 5,000 page, Proust novel. It doesn't matter. Story is story. All the principles apply. In fact, I use a 99 word story that was written by a very famous English writer. I forget mystery writer. That's 99 words, and I break it out. It's brilliant, and It's got all the basic story structure beats in 99 words. I'll send it to you.
I was going
I'll
to
send it
ask,
to you so,
yeah.
so you can see it. Yeah, and I break it out and I show you all the story structure beats. Now, it's 99, it's a piece of flash fiction, but it's got all the elements because it's a story. Doesn't matter how long it is, doesn't matter how short it is, doesn't matter what genre. Genres have nothing to do with any of this. Genres are a whole separate thing. They're just forms of storytelling. So the form that you're writing in doesn't matter. That's the writing function. It will augment, it will build on, it will make it into something more special in many ways, but the story is the story regardless of the form you're choosing to deliver it in.
Mhm.
And that mindset of stories and writing are not the same thing is a tough one for a lot of people.
Yeah.
But if you can find that, just understand the core distinction that story is just storytelling. It's got nothing to do with the delivery system.
So no matter what delivery system you're using, you still need
You
that basic
still need
structure.
those pieces. You still need those story structure elements that need to be in place and the character stuff that needs to be in
Mhm.
place.
Mhm. So I'm curious, you delve in various different mediums. So do you find one harder than the other? Do you find it
Yes.
like it,
Yes.
is it easier to find those plot points, those structural points within, say, screenwriting than it is within
No, no,
novel
no, no.
writing?
It's not because I approach the story piece regardless. I don't think about whether I'm writing a screenplay or writing a novel. Okay, so or a piece of creative nonfiction if it's a memoir or something like that. Story, even if it's a life story, the same principles apply. You're telling a story. You're not giving everybody the historical beats of your life. That's boring. You've got to find the story.
Mhm.
Okay. So screenwriting for me comes naturally. I'm a very visual person. I grew up with TV. I grew up with comic books. I grew up with I lived in movie theaters in high school and my earlier years. I'm a film animal. I find novel writing to be the scariest thing in the world, but I'm trying my hand at it. I'm working on a novel right now, and it's just so intimidating. I can't tell you. But the story, I got the story. I'm not worried about the story.
Mhm, mhm. So
It's
I'm just going to I want our listeners to sort of hear what Jeff has just said there. So despite all the years of experience that you've got in writing screenplays and even in nonfiction books too, but all of and teaching creative writing, teaching writing as well, that switch into fiction writing is still scary. And so I
oh
want everyone to hear it doesn't matter what your past experiences is when you're writing your first couple of books, it is intimidating, it is scary.
oh
I know so many journalists who also fear making that
yes,
from non-fiction to
it
fiction. So take
it's a
heart.
whole different animal. It's again, it's a screenwriter. It's not just adding a lot more words. It's a whole mindset, sensibility, where you focus. The story structure stuff still has to be there,
Mhm, mhm.
but I
Yeah.
think of Ian McEwan and one of his books, one of my favorite books is Saturday, which is a very small little book. I love his writing. He's such a gorgeous writer. Very little happens,
Mhm.
but all the story structure stuff's there. There's an opposition, there's a desire line, there's conflict at the end, there's a point to the whole thing. There's an inciting incident. All these things are there.
Yeah.
And he'd be one of the first people that if he was here in this meeting, he'd go, everybody just go home. Just get out of here. Go write. He doesn't believe any of this crap, right? So
So I
because
know that you do help people write, and I'd love it if you would just share a little bit of the way in which you help writers in one form or another kind of get their story out there.
I've Anatomy of a Premise Line and Rapid Story Development are my two, theory books. Okay, they're the things that really, and the Rapid Story Development incorporates this thing called the Enneagram, which is a whole complicated thing, but not really because I've kind of quote dumbed it down just for the story development function. But what I've done is I've taken these ideas that over the course of 10 years just kind of overtook me and I had to get them out of me and onto pages. And it turns out I've created a whole process and systems that are very productive for people.
Mhm.
I don't read anybody's writing. I'm not interested in your writing. All I want to know is how your brain's working in terms of storytelling. So I've developed a whole system where I do worksheets. And over the years, these worksheets have been finely tuned to ask very targeted questions to get to these story structure beats, to get to these character structure beats, to get to the whole process to teach people how to fish, not
Mhm.
give them a fish. So they don't need people like me. It's a repeatable, dynamic process that you learn
Mhm.
that in the admin premise line in particular, it's to give you some very important deliverables you need to sell yourself as a writer. You learn your log line for your query letter, how to build a log line. I've got
Mhm.
stuff up on my YouTube channel, Storygeeks YouTube channel, that there's a whole webinar I've done on how to do the log line machine, I call it, how to do a premise line, which you need to help pitch your book to an agent,
Mhm.
and how to write a short synopsis, which you need as a deliverable as a writer for people who are, well, what else you got? Where's your, give me your book, give me blah, blah. So these are
Mhm.
deliverables. And in that very first class, my foundational class, Anatomy of Premise Line, takes you through these deliverables while at the same time teaching you the process of how you can do this for yourself to validate you have an idea that's going to work.
Mhm.
It's
That sounds invaluable for our listeners. That's going to
it's
be a real
pretty
game
cool
changer
stuff.
for a lot of people who perhaps haven't thought about it in quite that way before.
Exactly.
So thank you very much. Before we wrap up, I know that you very kindly have a free gift for our listeners, Story Development Glossary and User Guide ebook. Can you just give us a couple of lines on?
Yeah, it's just a bit of a dictionary glossary of all the story development terminology that you hear all the time out there, and I have given you very precise definitions of those from my perspective based on how I teach this stuff. So, what's a supporting character? What is an opponent? What is a protagonist? What is a story? What's a situation? All that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
It defines all these out, and then I define what specific worksheets um, you would use those definitions in terms of my work on
Mhm.
my website, storygeeks.com. And if you go to the store, you'll see I've got a bunch of different tools packages where you can download all these worksheets with how-to videos to show you how to use how to do the worksheets.
Fabulous. Well,
Um,
we'll be sure to link to all of those in the
but so
notes.
that's it's geared toward my stuff, but it's also generally gives you definitional resources for just understanding these basic story structure terms that you hear out in the world,
Yeah. Demystify it. Yes,
demystify, yeah,
lovely.
demystify. You give you some grounding and what is it? What is a supporting character? What is it and what's their function? That kind of a thing.
Mhm. Jeff, it's been a real treat to get to chat to you today and hear your kind of approach to things, and especially coming from that filmmaking side of things. I think it's really refreshing and I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Oh, it was a pleasure. I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much. Great meeting you.